welcome to the Jewish Policy Center. I'm Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. Our guest today is Dan Diker. I'm going to introduce him more formally in a few minutes. Dan's been with us before, and interestingly, the last time he was here, we were talking about the president's trip to the Gulf, where he made overtures to the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and oddly, in the view of some people, Syria. It was a rather optimistic moment. Life has changed, but considering where we are now in the war between Iran and civilization, and with the possibility that negotiations are now happening, the point I raised then is a point I will raise now. President Trump's choice is always the modern, free market, capitalist West. Yes, give and take, profit and loss, offering them, even Iran, a place at the table. Lots of opportunities, lots of potential, and one big downside. When you make that offer to a terrorist organization or a terrorist country, they tend to lie. They tell you they'll take the deal. They pretend they take the deal, but they don't take the deal. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also looking to Dan today for his views on potential negotiations. The possibility, and this worries me, that the U.S. and Israel may not have the same end game in these negotiations. What's happening in Europe now that they believe that the Iranians can hit them. But before we go to Dan for a deeper dive, I'm going to introduce you, short form, to the JPC. JPC provides analysis of foreign and domestic policy. We support a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense, all of which are proving to be extraordinarily useful right now. Most important, we support the legitimacy and security of Israel and the efforts of the government and the IDF to defend the people of Israel on all of its borders and outside those borders. That includes Iran, that includes Lebanon. And we support the soldiers of the United States military in their quest to rid the world of the threat of nuclear capability in Iran. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. You can read our Insight article. The spring issue of In Focus magazine will be up shortly, and you can binge watch our previous webinar programs. And now our guest. Dan Diker is president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. You have to go look this up because it's a relatively new institution as institutions go, and it's fabulous. He is also there, the director of its counter-political warfare project. He's the former Secretary General of the World Jewish Congress and a research fellow of the International Institute on Counterterrorism at Reichman University. He's written 6 books. He's done a lot of things. You need to go look up his bio. Dan was born in New York, which gives him the possibility of seeing both sides. He earned a BA from Harvard University when that was an admirable institution. And he pursued his MBA at the Harvard Graduate School of Business and has a master's in counterterrorism and homeland security studies from Reichman University in Israel. Dan, going to you.
Just wanted to add one thing. My PhD is in international security studies from the University of Wales in the United Kingdom. Just to put a cap on the educational part.
I didn't know that. Now Harvard has gone, this way. How's the University of Wales holding up?
Oh, actually, it's actually an interesting question because I was looking for many, many years for a university that King's College in London was another option, but that had war studies or international security studies with a focus on cognitive warfare, psychological warfare, political warfare, hybrid warfare in the Russian sense. And it took me some time, but I did find it, and I had a wonderful mentor and advisor on the doctorate by the name of Professor Christian Kaunert, who's a German-born Brit. And someone who would feel very comfortable at the JPC or the JCFA, the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, which is, by the way, just to share with family and friends of the JPC and our viewers, this is the 50th year of the JCFA, but it is a rebranded institution since I had the honor of following in the steps of the great Ambassador Dr. Dora Gold, who passed away prematurely in March of 2025. So it for many years was called the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, which was a little less descript and less suggestive of what we do. As what we is, Shoshana, you and I have known each other for so many years, and work together wonderfully. That for Israel, the concept of security affairs and foreign affairs are completely integrated, which ultimately means that what Israel does in terms of its own security, strategically, existentially, has to be explained to the free world, and I think by extension now to the Arab world, in a way that other countries don't have to explain every security measure that they take as an expression of their foreign affairs, foreign policy. But we do, because Israel is under a spotlight, a magnifying glass, one of the smallest countries in the world that face one of the largest assaults on its very existence and on its legitimacy as part of the 193 UN General Assembly community. So that's why security and foreign affairs here are completely integrated when it comes to Israel's position in the world.
And it's really important to me, and I know to a lot of our listeners, that you're building on Dory Gold's legacy because he was a great friend and a brilliant thinker. And that's great. I mean, I can't think of anything better.
He
So
was.
he was, and his memory remains. So now, a lot of what you do and a lot of what Israel does is done in cooperation and coordination with the United States military. We're all in favor of that. We've been boosters of that forever. But let me start with a question. As you look at the Iran war, is it possible that Israel and the United States have different goals? Is Israel's end game regime change? And maybe the US end game is to end the launching of ballistic missiles. Are you guys coordinated with us guys?
I think so. First of all, I want to emphasize a point that we've emphasized here day in and day out with the Israeli press, media, digital media, as well as the American media, where we've had a very robust, we've had a very robust presence in the American media, from CNN, Fox, Newsmax, News Nation, the networks, as well as a lot of UK-based media. And we make the point that Israel and the United States, since the beginning of President Trump's second term, have been very, very closely integrated, cooperated, collaborative. I think even more than people realize. And it is true that President Trump said to Prime Minister Netanyahu right in the beginning of his second term, and let's bear in mind that Prime Minister Netanyahu has visited with the president 7 times in 1 year, or in a year and 13 months, which is unprecedented in American foreign policy, in Israeli foreign policy, and international, U.S.-Israel relations. And I think that really speaks exactly the level of the cooperation between the two leaders. And if you look at the statements of the president and the prime minister in the last 13, 14 months, you see a lot of overlap. When President Trump talks about unconditional surrender, he sounds like General MacArthur and when President and Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about total victory. He sounds like, he sounded like, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister Churchill, in following the occupation or the invasion of Poland by the Nazis in 1939, and the bombing of London in 1941. And so you see that the two men have been very much aligned in terms of the ultimate goal. Now, what does it mean, unconditional surrender and total victory, in this context? Does it mean regime change? Does it just mean the total degradation of the Iranian regime ballistic program, nuclear program, killer drone program, naval terror program? I would suggest that both men have been very careful to say that any kind of regime change is ultimately the decision of the Iranian people. And we know that between 80 and 90% of the Iranian people oppose this regime, have suffered under this regime terribly. Of course, the numbers of the massacre that the regime has imposed upon its own people is in the tens of thousands, and probably higher than we know, higher than 40,000, 500,000 people wounded by the regime itself. So regime change is the elephant in the room. That I think that both men would be very happy, and clearly Israel is going. The Israeli public discourse, the political discourse, the security discourse, the intelligence discourse is all surrounds the determination of Israel to help the Iranian people make a change and change this regime. And it is extremely important point, Shoshana, to understand why this regime cannot remain standing. This is a messianic, jihadistic death cult that will stop at nothing, not even mass murdering its own people. The Nazi regime didn't even do that. But this messianic regime that its DNA is fueled by an end of days scenario that in which they must provoke world disorder, chaos, violence, even Armageddon, in order to cause the reappearance of the 12th Imam, the hidden Imam. All this sounds like, crazy Netflix stuff, but it's really true. And the regime, if you look at the text by Ali Khamenei, by his predecessor, Grand Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, when he returned from Paris, you look at the constitution of the Islamic Republic, this is very much this messianic fervor and the necessary international violence, the destruction of Israel as part of this, the assault and ultimate destruction of the United States-led Western alliance also. They called it, it wasn't a coincidence that the regime called the America the Great Satan and Israel the Little Satan for the last 47 years. And this is the dedication of this regime to the destruction of the West, to the destruction of Israel, and their capability, not only their will, but their capability of doing it was very close to a type of realization back in 2025 when the assessments here in Israel, according to Israeli intelligence has been very, very sharp and accurate on the Iranian regime file, that they were within weeks of a capability of retrofitting a nuclear warhead, with the enriched uranium at 62%, 480 kilograms, which still exists, by the way. The uranium still exists. We don't know if it's completely under Isfahan, under the Fordo plant, or under the Natanz plant, but it still exists. So this is what brought President Trump and Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, close together when the president received intelligence from Israel and from the CIA. The CIA vetted the intelligence from Israel that there was a serious, acute, and very near-term threat to the national security of the United States of America by the Iranian regime itself. And I emphasize that now because there is so much talk where you are in D.C., in the Beltway, as well as in the major across the United States, especially by the chattering classes and the media, that there really isn't what's called an imminent threat to the United States, and therefore the accusation is that Israel has been pulling the United States into yet another war on behalf of Israel and the Jews, by the way. And I just want to end by making one more discrete observation. For many years since you and I met, I look at the title, the Jewish Policy Center, and immediately the idea comes up, why do you have to have a Jewish Policy Center? I can understand, the Center for the Middle East, the Center for Israel. Now I get it. And you know who helped us understand it? This regime helped us understand it, because this regime connects Israel, jihadism, the Jewish future with Israel's future, and I would add the Judeo-Christian future, because the war that we're in opposite this regime is the war for the future of Western civilization, and nothing less. And therefore, now I have a much clearer understanding of the critical importance of a Jewish policy center, which is very much the moral and strategic basis of Western civilization, and that is what is at play here, and what is at risk here, and why this regime must be destroyed, and the Iranian people have to take their future in their own hands and hand power to the opposition, as diverse as that opposition is.
So you've now run through about 5 of my questions,
but okay,
but you raised another one. Is it possible? Eli Lake wrote a great piece this week in the Free Press where he said Israel is losing the PR war in the United States, but it's not losing it in the rest of the world, meaning the Middle Eastern world, meaning the center of Israel's actual life. Okay. First of all, is it possible that some of the pressure that the president feels right now, some of it is gasoline prices, we know that, but some of it is the clamor in the media to attach this war to Israel's needs and not our own needs? So, in your opinion, is that driving the negative factor for Israel? And secondly, that's not the problem that the Middle Eastern countries have. That's not the problem of UAE or Saudi Arabia. Has it changed Israel's position with those people, and how? Is this a Jew thing in the United States?
It's a very compelling question. You ask a very, very compelling question, because one of the observations that we've been making, and a lot of the research driven assessments that we have here, and diplomacy that we have here at the JCFA, is the fact that there has been a reversal of fortunes, if you will, in terms of Israel's PR status in the Arab East versus the Judeo-Christian, let's say the Christian West. And that is to say that since September 2024, when Israel launched the Beeper operation to take out several thousand Hezbollah terror operatives in a matter of minutes, Israel's position in the October 7th Iranian Hamas invasion of southern Israel and its mass murder, kidnapping, rape, and torture of and their capture of their capture of 241 or 251 Israelis and other nationals taken into the torture tunnels in Gaza, has shifted Israel's PR position as of 2024 in the Beeper operations, has shifted Israel's position in the Middle East. Israel today is understood to be, as the great Lee Smith has written in his terrific book, The Strong Horse, I think it was back in 2008 or 2009, Israel is considered the strong horse today in the Middle East among the Gulf countries that have now, and the proof of that is they have now, for the first time in the last 24 hours, publicly come out in the international forum at the UN and blasted the Iranian regime. Without even mentioning Israel. And that's the biggest compliment those Arab regimes, those Arab states can give to Israel, is not mentioning Israel during the condemnation of the Iranian regime. That's number one. Number two, it's very clear that since the Obama years, when the administration actually embraced and empowered Ali Khamenei, who is now no longer with us, and by giving him $1 billion in cash, actually helping him to fuel and finance the the global terror network that they now have. That the Arab countries, beginning of course with Bahrain and the UAE, or the UAE, Bahrain, and even Saudi, Morocco for sure, and even Sudan in the Abraham Accords context, have come closer to Israel. Israel's bigger problem is in the West, it is a function of the metastasis of a classic anti-Semitism in a new wrapper. And the new wrapper is, of course, if it were Jewish individuals that had been cast as, the Zionist conspiracy by the former Soviet Union, today it's the Jewish state that's being cast as the purveyor of an international conspiracy, now, of course, to drag the United States into a war, when in fact the United States has been under an assault, an asymmetrical assault by the Iranian regime for 47 years. So this is a PR issue. In other words, it's not only that Israel's PR reversal of fortunes have become stronger, Israel's PR position, its image, it's known in Arabic as al-faras al-asil, the noble horse rider, in which Israel is really seen as a very muscular and powerful country in the eyes of its neighbors in the Middle East. But in the West, when Israel manifests power, when it exercises power in order to protect itself, the Jewish community in America and around the world, in the diaspora, faces a boomerang effect, because the world doesn't like Jews with power. As Leitel Shemesh, the great Israeli journalist, has written, how much is a dead Jew worth? And unfortunately, in the history of anti-Semitism, the world prefers dead Jews and bleeding Jews to strong Jews who know how to protect themselves collectively. That is, I think, that is at the root of what the Jewish world is facing with the Jewish state in Israel, the Jewish and democratic state, and its wonderful diaspora and critical diaspora community around the world. We never have been thrust so much together in this moment of destiny, opposite this murderous messianic regime, as at this particular moment in time, and it requires Israel and the Jewish community and as a matter of fact, not only the Jewish community but the Christian leadership, to whom we've been reaching out, to come together in the interests of our common humanity, common civilization, and to battle a virulent new strain of genocidal anti-Semitism, which takes the Jewish state and actually puts every diaspora Jew against their will, if you will, against his or her will, inside the enterprise called the Jewish state. That is now being targeted as as Professor Erwin Cutler said, all that is evil and all that is bad. And that is why it requires an enormous systemic and strategic effort led by the state of Israel, together with Jewish and Christian leadership, beginning with the United States, in order to fight this horrible metastasizing anti-Semitism.
Okay, but some of that anti-Semitism comes from the fact that European leaders, specifically the Canadians, the British, Canadians being semi-European, the French, being afraid of a segment of their own populations. So it's not like British people have suddenly just turned on Jewish people. That's never been the British problem, but they are definitely unwilling to take on the Muslim fundamentalist part of the population that is increasingly overtaking their policies. So it's not just PR, it's a question of, can they find the nerve to be the Western Democrats that they used to be, Democrats, small d. I'm not sure. The Italians are trying. Israel has some very good friends in Central Europe, the Czech Republic and some other, Hungary, some other people. But I think we have to understand.
I think we're finding. You're right, Shoshana. You're right. Wait a second. Whoops, sorry about that. Our podcasts are not immune from people trying to break in with phone calls at the same time. I think what we're finding here is that governments in Europe, or countries in Europe that have a more conservative government and are more nationalistically self-confident, I think, tend to fall on together with this Trump-Netanyahu alliance, as opposed to governments, for example, like Sir Starmer, Prime Minister Starmer, who has been very, very reluctant and hesitant to enter this war, even though he's under direct attack by the Iranian regime. The 3,000-mile missile, the semi-intercontinental ballistic missile that was fired at Diego Garcia at the British Army base, was not only in direct violation, but it just proves the mendacious nature of the Iranian regime, and it's it's cunning, because they obviously claim they didn't have any kind of ballistic missiles of that sort, and here they've hit two sovereign British bases in Cyprus and in Diego Garcia in the last period. So we may see British warships coming as part of an international armada to make sure that the Straits of Hormuz remain open. If in fact there is a limited ground special forces operation led by the United States, I don't know. I think Israel would be involved on identifying the enriched uranium deposits and getting rid of those. But I think that Europe, you may see British warships in the Straits as a part of Straits of Hormuz economic peacekeeping force. So you could call it that way.
Minesweepers. What the British have that we want in the Straits is minesweepers, because we don't have them. So maybe, but that's still going to leave. And I'll say that just while you've been talking, we got a bunch of questions on the chat thing. Um, it is about Jews for some people as much as it is about the state of Israel. I'm glad to see that you think the Jewish Policy Center has a role in helping here. Um, Jews
Critical
as
role.
thank you. Jews as individuals and as communities have been attacked not only in Europe but in the United States as well. And somewhere we all here on this side have to get the nerve to do something about it. Um, in a lot of cases, I suspect we're not going to. And it's the first time that I look at my life in the United States and say, is someone coming after my shul? Is someone coming after my grandchildren's nursery?
Yeah.
We as Jews now know a little bit about what Israel knows. So that's the Europeans, and maybe the thought of intercontinental ballistic missiles hitting Paris or, Rome, maybe that will help them. But there's another country that we need to talk about, and that's a NATO country which doesn't behave like one, and that's Turkey. What's the fallout of this? Oh, I shouldn't use the word fallout, I think. What's the end game here? Turkey can now see itself either as part of the West, part of the new emerging alliance system, or it can see itself as the Muslim Brotherhood successor to the Shiite Islamic terror that we're going to try to erase in Iran. Where's Turkey?
All three options that you lay out are possible. And the question is, what is the political, strategic, and moral will of the United States vis-a-vis NATO? Now, we know that President Trump has been very critical of NATO and has been punishing in his rhetoric of NATO. And I think it certainly sent shockwaves through the organization. We saw it very much at the Munich Security Conference that took place recently. So I think that NATO has to get its act together and decide what it wants to be and whether it is going to confront Turkey, because Turkey does not act like a NATO ally. On the one hand, they like to exploit its legitimacy as a NATO ally, but then they use that to mask, if you will, their malign behavior. Because as you said, Shoshana, very so accurately and eloquently, the Turkish regime, the Erdogan regime, sees itself as the successor empire, the Neo-Ottoman, Turkish empire, reviving its old empirical and imperial goals over a Middle East in which there very likely will be a vacuum of imperial power once the Iranian regime, and I do believe the Iranian regime will be destroyed or dismantled, one way or the other. And then it really leaves, it really demands of the West moral clarity and strategic will and clarity vis-a-vis Turkey, because Turkey is a very powerful country. They have a 1 million man army, the second most powerful army in NATO, and they have a very problematic, malign actor as president of Turkey. The West is going to have to really, get itself together on this issue, because this is a vacuum that we cannot afford to allow to fester. Now, Turkey plays a very problematic role in Jerusalem, by the way. It has all kinds of NGOs. They drum up all kinds of trouble in the Temple Mount. Many people in the West don't realize this, but Turkey is trying to become, the main Islamic player, non-Arab, of course, but Islamic player in this re-engineered, potentially completely redesigned Middle East. And I think that I think we can say that there is a degree of complexity with President Trump's embrace of Erdogan, certainly rhetorically saying, he's a nice guy and he's cooperating. Now, they did cooperate in the Board of Peace. They did cooperate in a certain way that the president deserves a lot of credit for, and that is releasing all of the Israeli and other hostages from the torture tunnels in Gaza. And that is, in our view, one of the reasons that the president did embrace Erdogan is to make sure that he was on side with the first and second stages, if you will, of the Trump 20-point peace plan, that they were part of that structure. But I think that, obviously, Erdogan welcomed that in order to exercise power in other places in the Middle East. And I think that the question you asked remains a question. We just don't know what will be, but we do know that Erdogan has his eye on the prize, and he wants to be the inheritor of the reins of power in this shifting Middle East, and he has that power must be checked by the West, with the U.S. leading the way.
And as a reminder, there are people who ask me all the time, why don't we just throw Turkey out of NATO? You can't. It's a unanimous vote to get in and a unanimous vote to get out. And Turkey is highly unlikely to give up the legitimacy, as you said, that NATO provides for it. So the only way to get rid of Turkey from NATO is to collapse NATO. I don't think so. And there you are.
By the way,
okay.
one of the reasons that we think, by the way, one of the reasons, just as an addendum here to this part of the discussion, that Turkey is very careful not to attack Israel militarily because of its membership in NATO. So there is a silver lining here, I think, and but it's a dangerous player. It's a dangerous player, and that has to be recognized.
Okay. Yes, we do. So turning back to the actual war that's going on in Iran, we have a couple of questions that people have called in. So you look at what Israel hit and you look at what the United States has hit. And the question is, first of all, do you think they've hit everything they mean to? Launchers, ballistic missile capabilities, understand that the CG headquarters no longer exists. Have they hit everything they want to from the air? And secondarily to that, is there going to be a requirement for boots on the ground, for example, to secure the nuclear sites? We're not even sure exactly where they are, but can you do that from the air? Israel and the United States tried that last summer, and it was successful to some extent, but probably not as much as we all had hoped. So, A, how do you think the Israelis are doing? B, do you think they'll ever end up with boots on the ground? And another question that came in is, how long can Israel do this without running out of stuff?
Well, question one, how is Israel doing? I would just reframe it, broaden it, and say, how is Israel and the United States doing as a partnership, as Secretary of War Hegseth has painted it, and he does so very eloquently in his own, in his way. But I will say, I think it's really important to emphasize that this administration, and it's the first administration ever since the founding of the reestablishment of Israel in 1948, that refers to Israel as a true and equal partner and refers to the two air forces as the strongest air forces in the world. This is really, to someone who studies this stuff in the middle of Jerusalem, music to our ears, the recognition, as Ambassador Yoram Ettinger has pointed out time and time again, of Israel's value added as an equal partner in intelligence, in retrofitting U.S. F-35s and F-16s, and way beyond in the intelligence world, our value. And I think it's just a great credit to this administration, and Israel is deeply, and I think I can say on behalf of the vast majority of Israelis, deeply grateful to this administration for their honorable and true partnership. Now, how are we doing? What we understand is that the missile capacity has been degraded. There's a range. Some the low end of the range is 65%. The high end of the range is 85 to 90%. But that's 85 or 90% of a high number, which means that there's still hundreds, if not more, of these ballistic missiles available, and killer drones are still there. We know that China and Russia, are on the wrong side of history here, and they've been assisting. Financially and in terms of supplying other forms of parts to the Iranian regime death machine. So it's not over. It's not over in terms of what we want is 100% degradation of their nuclear and ballistic missile or ballistic capacity, as well as their ability to send killer boats, suicide boats, killer drones. They've got mines. We've got all kinds of other weaponry that we've got to take out. Assassinations that are still waiting to be prosecuted. So that part of the war it may take another 2 weeks to get to 90% truly on everything, or 95%. But at the end of the day, it's the regime behind the weaponry that has to be taken out. And that's why, as we said earlier in our conversation, both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have been very cautious about not, claiming or demanding regime change from the outside. Obviously, it has to come only from the inside. But that is in a way the pickle here, because regime change takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. There are those that have said that regime change happens over a long period of time and then suddenly. But that long period of time, that pathway, can be months and months and months. It's not necessarily years, but it can be months and months and months. The American people do not have an appetite, nor does President Trump, in our understanding, has an appetite for months and months and months. He has a willingness for another few weeks, perhaps, but not beyond that. And that creates a real serious question about how much degradation can be done in the next few weeks. Not with beyond the discussion about regime change, as to what that's really what has to happen in order to end this very serious regime that has tentacles all over the world, not only the Middle East. And I will just say one thing about that. President Trump, I think, missed the message when he captured Maduro, the president of Nicaragua, the president of Venezuela, because Venezuela, as you know and I know, is a hornet's nest of Iranian regime terror. It's a transit point. It's a hub of Iranian regime terrorism and intelligence. It's not only narco terrorism in as President Trump said, more than 100,000 Americans die of cocaine overdoses every year because of Venezuelan narco-terrorism. That, I think, is off message. The real message is what Maduro was essentially a proxy, a diplomatic Latin American proxy of the Iranian regime. And as long as Maduro was in power, the Iranian regime had a terror foothold out America's back door. I think that
not out the back door, in the back door. Because,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because Iranians and Syrians came into Venezuela without passports, without visas, without diplomatic papers. They would cross the northern part of South America and they would enter Mexico, and the Mexican border was wide open. We are now feeling the effects. We know that there are sleeper cells here. We know that there is sabotage going on in this country because they came through Venezuela, across Colombia, across to Mexico, up, and the Biden administration did not close the border. So we're probably better off in two ways now. First of all, the border's basically closed. And secondly, Maduro is not there anymore. But we are now having to clean up the mess that was left to us. So you're not only right in regards to the Middle East side, which is the Iran side, we have it in our country as well.
You do. And just one last word that is something that I mentioned on Israel's main news program last night, Channel 11, is that there are 5,000 plus family members of the Iranian regime senior officials in the United States.
Right.
University, work, the Quincy Institute where you are in town, Trita Parsi and others. I mean, there is an infiltration. Do you know it is 5,000? That these are not 5,000 kids wearing little bathing suits and going sunning all the time because they hate their parents and that's why they went to the States. This is an intelligence threat, a security threat to the United States. And I think it has to be brought up and it has to be considered. As a very proud American who was born and bred in the United States, went to an Ivy League school and moved to Israel nearly 40 years ago, I see more and more that America has to wake up from this Rumpelstiltskin type of naivete that guaranteeing freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, which are all holy, clearly. However, there are bad actors, malign actors that are looking to subvert the United States, and that has to be taken very, very seriously with the Iranian regime's infiltration, as you said, of the republic.
Not only, and this one doesn't apply to you all at all, but the Chinese leadership also has sent its children and its privileged people to this country for two purposes. They're the legit guys that we gave visas to, and they come and they study in schools and they work as engineers, sending all the information home. But there was a huge mass of Chinese young men who crossed over the Mexican border. We've got the videos, thousands of them. They would line up like Nicaraguans or Guatemalans or Ecuadorians and cross into our country with no papers. So yeah, we have a big problem. Um, you can't solve that problem with us, but perhaps we can solve another problem together. All right, I got two more for you. I know you
Okay.
don't want to spend the whole afternoon here. Um, First of all, the war in Iran has taken the focus off Gaza, of course, but it has applied the microscope to Lebanon. Give us like 5 words on Gaza and 2 words on Hezbollah.
Gaza is a major problem. Why? Because of the question or the tee-up that you just offered us. The eyes are off Gaza. Gaza is an Iranian regime front on the southern border. It is not a separate grassroots, Palestinian problem. It is a threat by the Iranian regime on Israel's southern border. And the fact that on the one hand, the Hamas have been very quiet. If you notice, there haven't been major operations in Gaza during this last month, and that is because Hamas has been resupplying, re-engineering itself, rearming itself, and they are still in control. The only real possibility, Shoshana, is that there will have to be an Israeli reoccupation of Gaza and forced disarming of the Iranian-backed Hamas by the IDF. There is no other force that is able to do it, even though the Pakistanis have offered to do it, according to what I understand. People always ask, just as an aside, what is the Pakistani government doing being a mediator in these nominal diplomatic talks? Well, we know that General Asim has been a friend of the administration. He's been in the White House, and he has offered to send armed troops into Gaza in order to, I'm not exactly sure what in order to do. I would be highly doubtful that Pakistan, a Muslim majority country, would forcibly disarm the Hamas, a fellow Sunni, a Sunni organization, even though under the mandate and supply and financing of the Islamic regime in Islamic Republic. But Gaza is a very problematic situation. The Trump 20-point plan is not advancing. It is a stalemate right now. There's inertia right now. And the first and second conditions of the 20-point plan of President Trump is disarming Hamas, demilitarizing the Strip. That has not happened. The only reasonable way that it can happen is if Israel does the job. And so, from an Israeli point of view, we're looking to make greater progress on the Iranian front, on the Iranian regime front, on the Lebanese front. We're under intensive fire by the Iranian Hezbollah in the north. So we have to take care of those two fronts first before we go back to Gaza. And in a way, it's good that Gaza's been quiet, but Hamas is in control. Let's be very clear. They're in control on their side of the yellow line, which is what we call the upper west side of Gaza, as opposed to the upper east side of Gaza, which is now in American and Israeli control. But it is far from resolved.
On Pakistan, I would suggest that one of the things the Pakistanis are trying to do is balance the scales a little bit with India. India has made huge inroads in the region. And if Israel is going to be the strong horse, and if Israel and the United States are going to be together in the way the future of the region works, the Pakistanis want in. So it partly has to do with their own India-Pakistan problems. It has to do with their own economic problems. I'm not sure that they're planning to disarm Hamas either, but I think they're kind of poking in that direction. And I guess it's better to poke than to blow something up. Okay, and I would also assume that it's quieter in Gaza at the moment because Qatar's not bringing the money in and Iran's not sending the money. So it's a little harder for them to think about big stuff. On the other hand, Hezbollah appears to have plenty of munitions left and they're working it. But Israel's working it.
They do.
So
they do.
I'm going to carry us around to where we started. which is that Americans have at the moment very little patience for this war. And Americans base that on stupid things like the price of gas. And the price of gas is still lower than it was in the previous administration, for those who are watching. But Israel also has been accustomed to short wars, relatively short wars, until October 7th. And October 7th opened the door, pulled the scab off the wound. I don't know how you want to phrase it. Short wars followed by ceasefires are not peace. And I think October 7th taught Israel that the big war was coming. The big war is here now. So the question is, how do Israelis feel about this? They got 2.5 years of war. Now we've got 4 weeks of war, and we're not even there. Israel is in the war, 2.5 years almost. How do they feel?
Resolute, frustrated, determined, and resilient.
Great
and I
word.
can say,
most important word, resilient.
yes, I can say, I think confidently and unequivocally that Israel is the most resilient society in the world. It is extraordinary to see a country of 10 million people fielding an army that is based on reserve soldiers, men and women, both, who are in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, guarding, days and nights without sleep, going to the front lines. And now you have millions of people scattering, including myself, scattering into safe rooms on, having been attacked by hundreds and hundreds of Iranian missiles, even far less. By the way, there are 2,100 missiles have hit the Gulf states. 2,100 have been fired in the Gulf states, and we've been about 50% less than that, just as orders of magnitude. But the Israeli society is resolute and determined and resilient. And this is Israel's longest war. It's even far longer than the War of Independence. And my sense is that Israel will fight as long as it has to fight in order to win. And this is the major shift that's happened since October 7th. Israel is in it to win it. And before, Israel wanted to fight short wars because it believed that it was only fighting short wars. But you know what? Israel's enemies have been at war with Israel since 1948, and there have been different lulls, hills and valleys in that long war. And I think Israel has learned that it is being attacked in the long war. Jihad is by definition the long war. The Chinese wrote about the long war, societal warfare, and so did the Soviets. So this is the new reality that Israel has learned to live with, and we'll have to fight as long as we can until we win. And I think we will win, and we really need the United States to win it with us. And I think our job is to really point out to the American people, which has not been done as effectively as it could, that this is a war on Western civilization, where Israel is the representative Western civilization in the Middle East. That is what Khomeini said when he came back from Paris, when he called us the arrogant ones. And he said they have to extinguish Israel because Israel is America's representative in the Middle East. That's what they said. And I think we will do well to listen. I think we have internalized the messages of our enemy, and our key enemy is the Islamic Republic. And therefore, in short, the good news is that Israel is really determined to win this war and to try to maintain as much of a normal life under fire as possible. And I think that sociologists and military historians will write about national resilience on the home front, as part of the larger war strategy for the future for any free society. And I think that Israel will be a case study.
Israel is a case study. Did you know, they do this happiest populations in the world every year, and most of them are Scandinavian countries, and Israel's always up there. After 2.5 years of war, Israel still ranks number 8 in the world as happiest countries. Figure that one out, bottle it and sell it. Dan, you took my last question, which is always a question that needs an optimistic answer, and you nailed it. And you nailed all the other questions as well. So I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for talking with us. I want to do it again. And I want to say to our listeners, the next 2 Thursdays are Passover holidays. And so we will not be live the next 2 Thursdays. However, you will not be without the JPC because we're going to record some things and send them before the holidays. So you can have us before your Seder, after your Seder. Do not have us during the Seder, please. But let me take this opportunity to wish you all a Chag Pesach Sameach and a blessed Easter for those who celebrate. And we will be back live after the holidays. Dan Diker, thank you.
Thank you very much, and Pesach Sameach v'Kosher to everyone.
Thank you.